Today we're going to move on to verse 34 in Proverbs 3. And it's kind of it's very fascinating when you begin to really think it through, because what he says here is that God mocks proud mockers, or we might translate it even more literally as he scorns those who are scornful, but he gives grace to the humble. And here again, we have one of these contrasting proverbs where we see that there are really choices, there are paths that we can go through. And one of them is we can choose to be a mocker, we can choose to be scornful. The word that's used here literally means to be proud and boastful, inflated in our own egos. And as a result, we become hateful to those who we think are beneath us. It's the kind of arrogance that really looks down on other people and sees people as lesser than. And that person tends to go through life basically as they see the people that come in and out of their world, they categorize them based upon what they have created as their sense of value and worth. It's interesting. I've this doesn't happen to me a lot, but it's happened a few times. I remember once I was in England, and I was with another gentleman, and we encountered some other pastors that we were doing a conference there, and the pastor, he was interacting with these pastors, and they were talking back and forth, and I was just kind of standing there. And then my friend suddenly turned to me and he says, "Well, do you know Ken Ortize?" And the guy looks at me, having read my books, and said, "You're Ken Ortize?" And it was like, suddenly I took on a value that I didn't have a moment before. And it was actually awkward and embarrassing because we all do that kind of stuff. We see somebody that we think's a celebrity, and suddenly we make a big deal out of them. And let me put it this way. People who are celebrities and people make a big deal, and they actually really like that for a while, and then it becomes old because you have no peace and quiet. Your life is constantly being interrupted. And the mocker is somebody who has done that, but they've done it in a pejorative sense, not in the admiration of, I admire what you've done or I like what you've done, but rather they are always measuring their status against yours. Where are they in relationship to the pecking order of life? And so they kind of look down on you. And that's one of the reasons, actually, I find that a lot of times when I'm flying on an airplane, I'm sitting next to somebody and they say, "So what do you do?" And I say, "Well, I teach the Bible," or "I do this," or "I do that." I found that when I come right out and say, "Well, I'm a pastor," that 9 out of 10 times, if they're not a Christian, that really kind of interrupts the conversation, and suddenly they become very interested in looking for the sports page in the Wall Street Journal. And it's kind of an interesting thing, because you realize that in their mind they immediately have categorized you. And we all do this. I mean, that we can call it discrimination. We can call it all sorts of different things that we think are bad. But the reality is that we have this way of always sorting people. Now, in some ways, you have to do that. You have to evaluate people. And the Bible doesn't say that you shouldn't judge people. In fact, it says a spiritual man judges all things. In fact, a spiritual man judges everyone. We can't have a conversation with another person without making a judgment about who they are, what they're saying, and where they're coming from. And I hope that doesn't sound negative, but it's a simple reality. Am I talking to somebody who is a believer or a non-believer? Am I talking about someone who knows what they're talking about or doesn't know what they're talking about? I mean, I get a lot of emails from people who take issues with things that I say, and it's always interesting to me because I'm tempted to engage in a conversation, but the problem is, reality is I don't have time to have these ongoing debates over the internet with people. But the simple thing is that sometimes they say things that may sound really profound to them, but they aren't. They're not really sensible. They just sound clever, but they're not really sensible. And we live in an age where people are really attracted to what's clever, and they want to have it come quickly in a quip or in a soundbite. And yet, important things need to be thought through, and they need to be discussed. What do you mean when you say? What does that mean to you? And the proud man feels like his immediate assumptions about you or what you're saying are accurate. And there they dismiss or they embrace. Now, this becomes really an important issue as Solomon moves into chapter 4, because there he begins to really focus on paying attention to what godly authorities say to us in our life. that we really listen to what they say. Not that they're always right, and not that they're perfect and never make a mistake or get it wrong. But the whole point is we listen carefully, because most of the time we're going to find there's good advice. I remember when I went on Chuck Smith's staff, I basically told him that I was really looking forward to this because I felt like I had so much to learn from him. And I didn't say that to flatter him. I just was stating a real fact. He was a man who had been doing ministry, a lead pastor, a very successful ministry for many years. And I realized, and I was a young guy who really had built my first church from 70 people down to 7, and had decided I was going to go move out in the secular world because obviously I wasn't called to ministry. And then all of a sudden I get a call from Chuck Smith saying, "Do you want to come on my staff?" And the first question in my mind is, how'd you get my number? And how do you even know who I am? But the second thing is, well, of course, because I realized getting next to people who have proven their successful faithfulness to God, not even just the numerical dynamics, but they have been faithful and they've been in the labor for that long. You need to pay attention to that person, regardless. That's why when I talk to people who have expertise in any field, I don't pretend like I know what they're doing. Or like I understand what they're talking about. I want to hear them describe to me how they do what they do. I want their expertise to help me. I don't care if it's lawn care or it's cleaning my septic tank. You may find that weird, but when the guys come and pump out my septic tank every couple of years, I'm curious. How'd you ever get in this line of work? And I find most of them just didn't really wake up one morning and say, "I want to pump out septic tanks," but it was an opportunity, a short-term thing, and they built it into a business that has made them very successful. And they're very necessary for the rest of us. Well, I hope you understand what I'm saying is that there's something about pride that shuts off opportunities. You close doors around you that if you were just a little more humble about them, you would recognize that wisdom is often in the mouth of babes. And that's one of the things I find so enjoyable about my grandkids, the little ones, because they often say stuff. They look at the world as it appears to them in black and white, and they just speak to that moment. And sometimes there's just tremendous insight there, And I think that's why when Jesus said there is wisdom in the mouth of babes. I think that there's often real insight that can be gained from just looking at the obvious. And the proud man misses the obvious oftentimes because he looks past it. And he wants to be the one who imposes information and insight and wisdom, not someone who seeks to gain it. And that's where you find that when James says, we need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and even slower to respond, that we need to be ready listeners. And that's a lot of the theme that we'll find through the book of Proverbs. In fact, some people said James is the New Testament version of the book of Proverbs. But it's the idea that the people who really have the best advantage are those who are willing to be taught. My pastor used to say that it's willing to be teachable, as a person teachable, because he used to often say that most people are looking for counsel, are looking because they won't listen to what God says. He said, if you read the Bible and you listen to it, you'll find that God has all the wisdom in the world right there for you. And so the proud man ends up mocking really by neglecting what God has to say, and ends up finding that he is the one who is most mocked. But God gives grace to the humble. God gives grace to those who are teachable. And what does the word grace here mean? Well, it's favor, it's charm, it's elegance, but it's acceptance. In other words, he finds himself being invited, and later on he uses this term even, being invited to God's secret counsels. That God begins to give you a wisdom beyond your education, beyond your experience. You just simply have this ability to make the right decision because God is whispering in your ear. And it almost feels natural and intuitive, but in fact, it's deeply spiritual. And God helps you to make the right choices so that you can inherit honor. That's what he says. He gives grace to the humble, because as he goes on in verse 35, they're the ones who will be the inheritors of honor. But we'll talk about that more tomorrow. God bless you. Go in his grace.